When I was growing up, I was never really a Disney kid. To this day, I've never seen The Lion King, Aladdin, Jungle Book, or a bunch of other animated movies which apparently made many people's childhoods. Instead, I was raised on Star Trek, Star Wars, and Ray Harryhausen movies. However, as I approached my teen years, I distinctly remember being completely blown away by what I would later learn was a notorious Disney flop, Treasure Planet. Treasure Planet's concept is simply fantastic. Do an adaptation of Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, but set it in space. And so began one of the coolest exercises in world building I've ever seen. It would have been relatively easy for Treasure Planet to fully lean into its sci-fi setting and create archetypal worlds, ships, and aliens in line with the likes of Star Wars or Star Trek. However, Treasure Planet instead goes the exact opposite way, completely dispensing with any sense of space realism and going hard into its seafaring metaphor like nothing else has. It's almost like the filmmakers saw an astrophysics textbook and said,
"Get this thing out of my sight!"
Spaceships look like sail ships, people can breathe in space, stars going supernova pop up like hurricanes on the ocean, laser rifles and ship-to-ship guns are made to look like muskets and cannons. It is all positively ridiculous at first glance, but at the same time there's an internal logic to this universe. Rather than space being called, well, space, the backdrop of this universe is instead named as the Ethereum. The sails themselves seem to be based on the very real concept of a solar sail, which uses light from stars to propel ships, and a few throwaway shots here and there cement the 18th century aesthetic as just that, an aesthetic. But beneath the surface is an advanced working sci-fi world. I mean, I think it goes without saying that this is just such a cool looking world with such dreamlike imagery, it barely even needs an explanation. But it's also clear the filmmakers behind it really went to the effort of giving this universe an internal logic. And it's that extra effort which conjures some of the best visuals, worlds, ships, and character designs throughout. As a way to interpret the original work, it's also fiendishly clever. If you've not read the famous book, it still holds up to this day, and Treasure Planet is easily one of the best adaptations in general. Reimagining it as a sci-fi only enhances the great things about the original story. Long John Silver, rather than a peg leg, is instead remade as a cyborg. Silver's own parrot here becomes an alien which can morph and duplicate objects and people, including amusingly parroting back to them what they say. While it perfectly embodies the traditional high seas pirate adventure of the novel, it's clear there's also a lot of love for science fiction here. The writers and animators clearly had lots of fun conjuring up a wealth of scary and fun alien designs. There's also some heavy inspiration from Forbidden Planet when we reach the titular Treasure Planet. A world full of ancient technology left by a long-dead alien civilization. There's even a riff on the Iconian gateways from Star Trek. It's a universe which packs an absurd amount of creativity, striking images, and fun characters. All of it presented beautifully to the audience. Treasure Planet was produced at the tail end of the Disney Renaissance era, just as fully 3D CG animation was becoming all the rage. But while it didn't use what was considered the absolute cutting-edge animation technology of the time, that doesn't make Treasure Planet's technical achievements any less impressive. Similar to movies like The Road to El Dorado or Atlantis: The Lost Empire, Treasure Planet utilized traditional hand-drawn characters placed inside CG environments with a technique called deep canvas. This was something first pioneered in Tarzan, in which these 3D environments could be stylized with oil painting-like brushstrokes rendered in 3D space. To this day, Treasure Planet holds the record for the most amount of deep canvas shots used in an animated movie, a record which will likely always stand. But Treasure Planet took it even a step further by using CG animation and hand-drawn animation to create single characters. For example, Long John Silver's cybernetic limbs and implants are 3D CG creations which were motion matched to his hand-drawn body. If you have any experience at all working with animation, you'll know how incredibly difficult this is to do, but the resulting effect is seamless in the final film. That extra effort is visible all over this movie, with its razor-sharp direction and excellent visual storytelling. It's one of those fantastically paced movies where you're constantly learning new information about the plot and characters, but it's delivered in such a fun way you don't even notice what you're learning. What takes an entire chapter to happen in the book is condensed into a single scene in some parts of this film, and yet the story doesn't even remotely suffer from it. And this propulsive adventure is carried wonderfully by a score from Rupert Gregson-Williams. It totally embodies that high seas sense of fun, but also uses sci-fi sounds to add some texture and uniqueness. It's a really great listen. As well as the excellent world building and presentation, Treasure Planet has a fine ensemble cast of characters. Our protagonist is Jim Hawkins, of course, voiced by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. At first, he's the typical 90s/early 2000s bad boy. He wears a black jacket, he's got a scar on his cheek, and he cuts some mean tricks on his sail-flying surfboard thingy. But while other movies would use these tropes as a substitute for an actual personality, there is more to Jim Hawkins here. Ultimately, he yearns for adventure, but sees himself as being robbed of his future following the sudden departure of his estranged father. But as the film goes on, we see that sense of hope and optimism return, not to mention his resourcefulness and cleverness. On the face of things, this is a character which would induce eye rolls, but thanks to the nuanced writing and solid performance from Levitt, Hawkins is much more than he appears. Much like the book, however, Long John Silver, voiced here by John Murray, is easily the best character. His cybernetic design is immediately iconic, and Murray injects him with an authentic charisma and joy for life. He's fun and endearing, but is also presented with a hint of danger and intimidation. He's the loving father figure for Jim, but also the cutthroat villain of the story. We get the feeling John Silver was once a truly decent person, driven to be a cunning survivor by an unnamed trauma of some kind. His grey morality makes him difficult to trust, but at the same time the vocal performance and animated expressions make us sympathise with him in many ways. Dr. Doppler, voiced by David Hyde Pierce, is the comedy sidekick of sorts. Someone with a lot of knowledge but very little experience. He's pompous and ridiculous, but also naive and nervous. In a lot of other movies, this character would be extremely annoying, but because it's David Hyde Pierce, it all works. I mean, after all, the guy made an entire career out of being a charming but timid, intelligent guy. We also have Captain Amelia, voiced by Emma Thompson. She's the classic British naval commander, simply oozing elegance and class, but packing just as much gravitas and authority. Once again, an archetype made compelling thanks to the casting. Emma Thompson is effortlessly witty and charming, and some of the best dialogue is reserved for Amelia and her first mate, Mr. Arrow. Mr. Arrow himself is just one of many more terrific supporting characters, but I suppose the next most notable is also, unfortunately, the weakest. Martin Short as Insane Robot Ben is unfortunately the weak link of the cast. The design is cool, and Short is doing his best to make it work, but ultimately he's just not as funny as Doppler or as endearing as a character like Morph. Luckily, despite some jokes which fall a bit flat toward the end, Ben doesn't bring down the movie all that much. The story of Treasure Planet is, well, the story of Treasure Island. If you don't already know it, just go and read the book already, or watch the Muppet version, I don't know. But like I said before, not only does Treasure Planet stand on its own, but it's also one of the best adaptations of the story out there. This is a coming-of-age story driven by its rich and enjoyable characters. Jim Hawkins and John Silver at first glance are characters you've seen countless times before, but because of the great performances, animation, and truly sincere script, their relationship as surrogate father and son becomes truly moving. There's a real heart here which is demonstrative of the passion and belief the filmmakers had with this project. It's a movie which does what all good adventures should: visual spectacle, exciting action, and an emotional core which may even make you all teary-eyed by the end. It's just a shame it didn't find the success it deserved back in 2002. Treasure Planet was unfortunately caught in the fray of a changing animation industry. Audiences were clamoring for more Pixar movies, making a truly creative project like Treasure Planet seem dated. It wasn't helped by a poor marketing campaign from Disney themselves, and unfortunately bombed hard upon release. To this day, it remains one of the biggest money losers in Disney's history. But anyone who saw it as a kid, whether on an old VHS tape or caught randomly on TV, knows it didn't deserve to be seen as such a failure. Treasure Planet is a beautiful and creative adventure film, filled with wonderful characters and a sincere emotional core. While I didn't grow up watching a lot of Disney classics, with movies like Treasure Planet, I don't feel like I missed out. Jesse Adair asks, who is your least favourite main character in Battlestar Galactica? I don't know if this is a controversial choice, but I really don't like Lee Adama. Perhaps it's because he shares so many scenes with the awesome Edward James Olmos, whose screen presence always makes him the de facto gravity well of every scene, but I find Lee really whiny, and the whole love triangle bollocks with Starbuck is easily the worst thing about that show. But whereas Starbuck at least had some charisma and a fun personality, I found most of Lee's material to be such a drag. The one time he was legit brilliant was in the season 3 finale with the whole Forgiven monologue that he does. Outside of that though, he was the character I cared the least about and was never very interested in any of his storylines for the most part, especially stuff like the Black Market episode. Also, I'll never forgive him for destroying the Battlestar Pegasus. David Guerrero asks, Are you a man or a muppet? Don't ignore the question. The longer you ignore it, the more suspicious we get. I'm saying nothing, mate. Thanks for watching. If you like what I do and want to see more videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on all my new uploads. If you like what I do and want to help the channel grow, join me over on my Patreon where you can see videos like this early. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.